His name was Marie-Joseph Paul Yves Roche Gilbert du Motier, Marquis de Lafayette. Born an aristocrat, but in America he became known simply as Lafayette. And while his many names may have been shortened, his list of accomplishments was certainly not. Orphaned at the age of 12, Lafayette grew up with a desire to distinguish himself and bring honor to his family. This is where his path met up with the cause of the American colonists and their revolution. Born on April 9, 1771, in Chavaniac in southern France, Lafayette came from a distinguished family where the men had a long tradition of military service. One of his ancestors had been a companion at arms of Joan of Arc's army during the siege of Orleans in 1429. He lost his father, Michel de Lafayette, when he was killed at the Battle of Minden in what is known as the 7 Years' War. Lafayette was just 2. His mother left Gilbert with his grandmother, and she went off to court to persuade King Louis XV for a small pension for her son and to try to earn a way into the respected court circles for him. But when Lafayette was 12, both his mother and his grandmother died, leaving him wealthy but alone. When he was 11, his mother summoned him to Paris to live with her and his great-grandmother, and he was sent to school at the Collège du Plessis, part of the University of Paris, and at the age of 13, he was commissioned as an officer into the Black Musketeers, Louis XV's personal horse guard. His duties were mostly ceremonial. At the age of 14, he was betrothed to the 12-year-old Marie Adrienne François de Noailles, the daughter of the Duc d'Ayen, and 2 years later they were married. After his marriage, he continued on with his education and was given a commission as a lieutenant in the Noailles Dragoons in 1773. And when he turned 18, he received the captaincy in the Dragoons that he had been promised. However, the French military was going through a paring down at the time, and soon he would have no such service in the military. About this time, he attended a dinner where he heard the English Duke of Gloucester, the brother of the King of England, sympathize with the plight of the American colonists, and later said, "My heart was dedicated." And when he heard French officers were going to America, he went to the American agent in France, Silas Deane, to beg to be sent as a commissioned officer to America. When he found out that the Continental Congress had no funds for his ocean voyage, he bought a ship, the Victoire, for £112,000 and left France without telling anyone. This greatly angered his wealthy, notable father-in-law, who had King Louis XVI issue orders to arrest him and bring him back to Paris. Lafayette pretended he was going to comply with the orders, but instead returned to his ship and set sail on a 2-month journey to the colonies, where his time was spent learning English and being quite seasick. He landed on North Island near Georgetown, South Carolina, on June 13, 1777. He was 19 years old. After a long journey to Philadelphia and getting a runaround from the members of the Continental Congress, it was finally agreed they would give him a commission as Major General to denote only his highborn status, not his military service. Lafayette agreed to serve without pay, and soon he was introduced to General George Washington at a dinner in Philadelphia. The two men liked each other at once and would become lifelong friends. It is said that Lafayette was baptized by fire into war at the Battle of Brandywine, his first taste of combat, where he was shot in the leg on September the 11th, 1777. Before seeing to his wound, he studied his troops and led them in an orderly pullback. After a 2-month recovery, he returned to the battle where he commanded a division previously led by Major General Adam Stephen, where he assisted General Nathaniel Greene scout British positions in New Jersey, and with 300 soldiers he defeated the Hessian forces, which were much greater in number, on November 24, 1777. During the hard winter of 1777-78, he stayed with Washington at Valley Forge. During that time, he was asked to lead an invasion into Quebec from Albany, but when he got to Albany, he discovered that there were too few troops to mount an invasion. But the trip wasn't a total waste because he managed to convince the Oneida tribe to assist the Americans in the war. In February of 1779, Lafayette returned to Paris to recruit more help for the Americans. But since he had disobeyed King Louis XVI by leaving to go to America, He was placed under house arrest for 8 days. But this was merely a formality by the king, because Lafayette was given a hero's welcome back to France, and was given a gold-encrusted sword by Benjamin Franklin's grandson William Temple Franklin in Paris that had been commissioned by the Continental Congress. He continued to work with Benjamin Franklin and was able to secure more military power for the American Revolution, and was able to get 6,000 troops commanded by General Rochambeau before going back to the American forces and his beloved General Washington. On his return to Boston, he was celebrated, but he found the morale low. He shared the news that the French and Rochambeau were coming to the aid of the Americans, and with the help of Alexander Hamilton, wrote to the officials of each state asking for them to provide more troops and provisions. Lafayette continued leading troops in battle and was ordered by Washington to go after the traitor Benedict Arnold, who was by then commanding British forces in Philadelphia. Yorktown was his last real battle in the American Revolution. He and his 400 men took Redoubt No. 9, after his comrade and friend Alexander Hamilton and his men took Redoubt 10. These two victories were the linchpin in getting through the British defenses and allowed eventual success and surrender of General Cornwallis. Although war was to go on another year, the victory at Yorktown was essentially the end of the American Revolution. Lafayette was appointed as an advisor to America's envoys in Europe, Benjamin Franklin in Paris, John Jay in Madrid, and John Adams in The Hague. In January of 1782, Lafayette received yet another hero's welcome in Paris and was received at the Palace of Versailles. In France, he worked with Thomas Jefferson to establish trade agreements between France and the American colonies. He joined the French abolitionist group, the Society of the Friends of the Blacks. In the late 1780s, Lafayette became a key figure in the French Revolution, which descended into mad chaos and anarchy. In 1789, he presented his draft of the Declaration of the Rights of Man and the Citizen, which he wrote himself with Thomas Jefferson providing input. The following day, a group of insurgents stormed the Bastille. With much acclaim, he was appointed Commander-in-Chief of the French National Guard, whose job it was to establish and maintain order under the control of the French Assembly. In October of 1789, after the king rejected the declaration, a group of women fishmongers marched to Versailles, angry over the scarcity of materials to make bread. Reluctantly, Lafayette led them and tried to broker a peace between the monarchs and the people. But in trying to keep the peace and establish a constitutional monarchy, Lafayette made many enemies. He began to be loathed by members of each faction, and after the king and his family almost escaped France, Lafayette was blamed by extremists as he was responsible for the royal family's custody, and they felt he was a royal sympathizer. On August 14, 1792, a warrant was issued for Lafayette's arrest. Hoping to escape to the United States and President Washington, he entered the Austrian Netherlands, but was taken prisoner by Frederick William II of Prussia, who saw him as an instigator and feared he would try to overthrow monarchy in Austria. He appealed to his beloved general, now President Washington, for help, but the United States was on the brink of hostilities with France itself at that time, and the situation was precarious. But through his many allies and friends on both sides of the Atlantic, Lafayette was finally released after 5 years on September 19, 1797. With the help of his beloved wife, Adrienne, Napoleon Bonaparte restored Lafayette's French citizenship in 1800. In 1824, Lafayette was invited by President James Monroe to visit the United States for the upcoming 50th anniversary of the nation's birth. He arrived in New York on August 15, 1824, with his son, George Washington Lafayette, and was greeted with great fanfare by now aged Revolutionary veterans. The celebrations lasted for 4 solid days and nights before he departed for Boston. Thinking it would be a relaxing trip, he was surprised to find the route lined with cheering citizens at every town along the way. He was one of the last of the revolutionary leaders by that time. New York, Boston, and Philadelphia all attempted to outdo each other with their celebrations for Lafayette's visit, and massive building projects were begun in preparation for his arrival, and as a mason, he laid the cornerstone for many new buildings in each city as he visited. His stay in the United States was 16 months, and he visited all of the now 24 states in the Union, each giving him enormous welcomes, including the naming of cities in his honor, such as Fayetteville, North Carolina. He visited Washington, D.C., and was surprised by the simplicity of President Monroe, and stopped at Mount Vernon to pay his respects to his dear friend and former commander, George Washington. He was even in Washington to witness one of the most contentious presidential elections, in which there was a tie in the Electoral College, and the House of Representatives elected John Quincy Adams as president. He shook hands with the runner-up, Andrew Jackson, and visited his home in Tennessee. On September 6th, he celebrated his 68th birthday at the White House with President John Quincy Adams, and departed for home the next day. He took many gifts with him, including a large tract of land that had been gifted to him by Congress, and a large gift of $200,000 for his service to the country during the war, a much-needed gift since the once wealthy Marquis had lost his fortune during the French Revolution. In February 1834, Lafayette collapsed from pneumonia. He got better for a time, but the terrible weather in May caught him outside in a thunderstorm. He died on May 20th, 1834, at the age of 76. He was buried next to his beloved Adrienne in Picpus Cemetery under American soil from Bunker Hill that he had brought back from his trip to the United States. King Louis Philippe ordered a military funeral in order to keep the public from attending, and crowds formed to protest their exclusion. In the United States, when President Andrew Jackson heard of his death, he ordered that the same honors bestowed on Washington at his death should be given to America's adopted son, and both houses of Congress were draped in black for 30 days, and members of Congress wore mourning badges. Gone was this last surviving hero of the American and French Revolution. Gone was this great protector of freedoms, Lafayette. And he is how history happens.